Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. American Gangster 2007 Movie Review. American Gangster is a 2007 American biographical crime drama film directed and produced by Ridley Scott and written by Steven Zaillian. The film is loosely based on the criminal career of Frank Lucas, a gangster from La Grange, North Carolina who smuggled heroin into the United States on American service planes returning from the Vietnam War, before being detained by a task force led by Newark detective Richie Roberts. The film stars Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe, with CO stars Ted Levine, John Ortiz, Josh Brolin, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Ruby Dee, Lee-Marie Nadal, Cuba Gooding Jr., Armand Asante, John Hawkes, and RZA. Development for the film initially began in 2000, when Universal Pictures and Imagine Entertainment purchased the rights to a New York Magazine story about the rise and fall of Lucas. 2 years later, screenwriter Steven Zaillian introduced a 170-page scriptment to Scott. Original production plans were to commence in Toronto for budget purposes, however, production eventually relocated permanently to New York City. Because of the film's rising budget, Universal cancelled production in 2004. After negotiations with Terry George, it was later revived with Scott at the helm in March 2005. Principal photography commenced over a period of 5 months from July to December 2006. Filming took place throughout New York City and concluded in Thailand. American Gangster premiered in New York on October 20, 2007, and was released in the United States on November 2. The film was well received by critics and grossed over $266 million worldwide. Many of the people portrayed, including Roberts and Lucas, have stated that the film took much creative license with the story, and 3 former DEA agents sued Universal claiming the agency's portrayal was demoralizing. American Gangster was nominated for 21 awards, including 2 Oscar nominations for Best Art Direction and Best Supporting Actress for Ruby Dee, who also won a Screen Actors Guild Award for Outstanding Performance by a Female Actor in a Supporting Role. In 1968, Frank Lucas is the right-hand man of Harlem mob boss Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. When Johnson dies of a heart attack, Frank enters the heroin trade, buying directly from producers in Thailand and smuggling it into the U.S. through returning Vietnam War servicemen. Frank sells his heroin under the brand Blue Magic, the affordability and purity of which make it incredibly popular, eliminating much of his competition. Newark detective and aspiring lawyer Richie Roberts is ostracized in his precinct after handing in almost $1 million that he found in a mobster's car. Captain Lou Chubak puts Roberts in charge of a special task force that targets major drug suppliers, after Roberts' partner overdoses on Blue Magic. Roberts is also depicted having a bitter divorce battle with his ex-wife over his infidelity. Frank's heroin racket prospers. He eventually sells Blue Magic wholesale to many dealers in the New York tri-state area and expands his distribution through other criminal organizations. With this monopoly, Frank becomes Harlem's top crime lord, opening legitimate business fronts and maintaining a low profile, while befriending politicians and famous celebrities, such as former world heavyweight champion Joe Louis. He buys a mansion for his mother and recruits his 5 brothers as his lieutenants. Frank eventually falls in love with and marries Eva, a Puerto Rican beauty queen. He attends the fight of the century with her, where Roberts spots Frank, notices he has better seats than the Italian mobsters, and begins investigating him. Frank also comes to odds with competing local gangster Nicky Barnes, corrupt NYPD detective Nick Trupo, who is among many people Frank is forced to bribe, and the Corsican Mafia, who unsuccessfully attempt to assassinate Frank and his wife for putting them out of business. One night, Roberts' detectives witness one of Frank's cousins, Jimmy Z, shoot his girlfriend. He becomes their informant in lieu of being convicted. They make Jimmy wear a wire, through which they learn that Frank has negotiated one final shipment of heroin after the fall of Saigon. They identify and search one of the last planes carrying Lucas stock, discovering that it is being smuggled through the coffins of dead servicemen. They follow the drugs into Newark's projects and obtain a warrant to raid Frank's heroin processing facility, which results in the death of Frank's nephew Stevie Lucas and the arrest of Frank's brother Huey. They then arrest the other 4 brothers, and finally Frank himself. During a trial against Frank, Roberts offers him a chance at leniency if he will help him expose corrupt police officers, to which Frank agrees. Following Frank's cooperation, 3/4 of the New York DEA and many NYPD officers are arrested and convicted, while Trudeau commits suicide to avoid arrest. Roberts becomes a defense attorney and has Frank as his first client. Frank is sentenced to 70 years in prison, of which he serves 15 years and is released in 1991. In 2000, Universal Pictures and Imagine Entertainment purchased the rights to The Return of Superfly, by Mark Jacobson, an article published in New York Magazine story about the rise and fall of the 1970s heroin kingpin Frank Lucas. In 2002, screenwriter Steven Zaillian brought a 170-page script to director Ridley Scott, who expressed interest in making 2 films from it. However, Scott did not immediately pursue the project, choosing to make Kingdom of Heaven instead. In November 2003, Universal and Imagine entered negotiations with Brian De Palma to direct True Blue, with a script by Zaillian based on the life of Frank Lucas. Zaillian interpreted the account as one of American business and race, focusing the script thematically on corporate business. Production was initially slated for a spring 2004 start. In March 2004, the studio entered new negotiations with Antoine Fuqua to direct, as well as Denzel Washington to star in the film as Frank Lucas. The following May, Benicio del Toro entered negotiations to star as Richie Roberts, the detective who brought down Lucas. Production of True Blue was reset to begin in early fall 2004, with the film slated for a release date of June 3, 2005. In September 2004, Donya Ramirez entered negotiations to join the cast of the film, now titled American Gangster. Universal Pictures reported that it greenlit American Gangster with a budget of $80 million, which escalated to $93 million, with $10 million for development costs and $3 million for the delay of the production start date. Sources close to the director insist that the budget was $93 million from the beginning. The studio also sought for American Gangster to be produced in Toronto rather than New York City to save money, but Fuqua resisted the relocation. The studio's parent company General Electric received tax credits in New York City, so production was moved to the city. This change increased the budget to $98 million. Fuqua's camp insisted that it was seeking ways to reduce the budget, but the studio argued about several aspects of the project under him. The director had wanted to film a Vietnam sequence in Thailand and to cast notable names such as Ray Liotta and John C. Reilly in minor roles. To add to the studio's budgetary concerns, Fuqua was rewriting the script during the pre-production process. The director did not have a shot list, final locations, and supporting actors signed to initiate production. Fuqua was fired on October 1, 2004, 4 weeks before principal photography would begin. The studio cited creative differences for its action. After Fuqua's departure, the studio met with Peter Berg to take over directing the film, and Washington had approved of the choice. Due to the search potentially escalating a budget already in the $80 million range and the difficulty in recouping the amount based on the film's subject matter, Universal cancelled production of American Gangster, citing time constraints and creative elements. The cancellation cost the studio $30 million, of which $20 million went to Washington and $5 million went to Del Toro due to their pay-or-play contracts. In March 2005, American Gangster was revived as Universal and Imagine entered negotiations with Terry George to revise Zalian's script and direct the film, which was to be financed with a target budget of $50 million. Will Smith was approached to replace Washington as Frank Lucas, though an offer would be postponed until George completed his revision of the script. George cut many key scenes, characters, and Asian locations to reduce costs, but the project failed to progress given financial problems and producer Grazer feeling they couldn't make it right without the removed material. After Scott and Zalian met on another project, Zalian brought up the Gangster project again with Scott, who decided he was ready to do it. Producer Brian Grazer and Imagine executive Jim Whittaker decided against pursuing George's attempt and to return to Zalian's vision. In February 2006, Ridley Scott entered talks with the studio to take over American Gangster from George, returning to Zalian's draft as the film's basis. Washington returned to his role as Lucas, and Russell Crowe was attached to star as Roberts. Crowe was drawn to the project based on his previous work with the director on Gladiator and A Good Year. Washington wanted to work with Crowe again, after 1995's Virtuosity. Production was slated for summer 2006. Scott had discussed the script with Crowe as they worked on A Good Year in France, and they sought to take on the project. The director reviewed Zalian's script, Terry George's rewrite, and a revision by Richard Price during the project's incarnation with director Antoine Fuqua. Scott preferred Zalian's approach and chose to follow it. The director encountered a challenge in the script since the characters Frank Lucas and Richie Roberts do not encounter each other until 20 minutes before the end of the film. The director sought to flesh out the private universes of these characters, which would evolve, and to have scenes cut between the two characters to provide a balance. Elements such as Frank Lucas's interaction with his family and Richie Roberts's dysfunctional marriage were written to add to the characters' backgrounds. The rappers T.I., RZA, and Common were added to the cast to appeal to younger audiences. Scott chose to direct American Gangster by highlighting the paradoxical values of Frank Lucas and Richie Roberts. The film somewhat focuses on the comparatively ethical business practices of the wicked gangster and the womanizing and failed marriage of the do-gooder police detective. Washington, who was not normally a fan of gangster films, chose to portray Lucas when he saw the arc of the character, which ended by showing the prices that Lucas paid for his actions. To prepare for their roles, the actors met the actual persons. In addition, Washington took on Lucas' Southern accent, and Crowe practiced to match Roberts's manner of speaking and body language, requesting tape recordings of Roberts to assist in his preparation. The following March, the studio rehired Zalian to rewrite the script for American Gangster. The budget had escalated to $100 million, which Grazer stated was unexpected given it's not a high-concept comedy, it's not a fantasy movie, it's not a four-quadrant movie. Grazer and Scott still had to pay back the studio $3 million for a budget overrun. Principal photography began in July 2006 in New York City. American Gangster was filmed over a period of approximately 4 months in over 180 different locations, most of them across New York. It set the record for containing the highest number of filming locations of a movie. 2 months were spent in New York, with all the city's 5 boroughs being used. Approximately 50 to 60 locations were set in Harlem alone. While in the neighborhood, Scott stated that he found several interiors that had been untouched since the 1940s. According to production designer Arthur Max, exhaustive location scouting was done to find parts of New York that could still resemble the city of the early 1970s. Filming Lucas headquarters at 116th Street 20 blocks north, on 136th Street. In his interview with ComingZone.net, Scott stated that he just walked in and just show OT in the house. Several gas masks were brought by producers due to health hazards and sanitary concerns existing in the buildings. Scott found filming in Harlem to be difficult, commenting that the rapid gentrification in Harlem provided poor opportunities for shooting angles. Handheld cameras were extensively used to depict a guerrilla filmmaking style. Other locations for principal photography include the Brooklyn Navy Yard, the Nassau Veterans Memorial Coliseum, Old Westbury Gardens, a segment of the George Washington Bridge, and the Brooklyn Supreme Court House. Briarcliff Manor in upstate New York had the locations for both the Lucas farm and the estate Lucas buys for his family. Morgue scenes were filmed in Morristown, New Jersey. Filming locations began setting up in Thailand in November 2006, after Branko Lustig consulted with Sovet Yadmany, the country's tourism minister. Filming for American Gangster concluded in Chiang Mai the following month. Using his experience from visiting New York in the same time period in which the film's story took place, Scott sought to downplay a Beatles atmosphere to the film and to instead create a shabbier atmosphere, saying that Harlem was really shabby, beautiful brownstones falling apart. Production and costume design was emphasized, transforming the location into the rundown streets of Upper Manhattan from the late 1960s and early 1970s. Denzel Washington, as Frank Lucas, had 64 costume changes. In 2006, Greg Calloway was approached by producers to produce a soundtrack for the film. He presented the idea to Atlantic Records chairman Craig Coleman, and one of the company's artists, T.I., got an acting role in the film. However, the deal did not go further because Universal Pictures owned the rights to the film. It was a Universal film and they were not going to give the soundtrack to WMG, Atlantic's parent company. Thus Scott brought back Mark Streidenfeld, who had worked with him in A Good Year. The composer stated that the overall tone needed to be something bigger and darker given the characters' strong personalities, and while not being the original intention, he added shades of blues and soul music to fit the 1970s setting. The musical score for American Gangster was recorded between April and May 2007 by Streidenfeld, with the help of orchestrator Bruce Fowler and conductor Mike Nowak, using an 80-piece orchestra recorded in sections as well as acoustic pre-records, performed by Streidenfeld himself. Additional score material was composed and recorded by Hank Shocklee. The official soundtrack album for American Gangster was released by Def Jam Recordings within a week of the film's release. In addition to Streidenfeld and Shocklee's score material, the soundtrack album also features songs influenced by music in the 1960s and 1970s, including from blues and soul musicians such as Bobby Womack, the Staple Singers, Sam and Dave, and John Lee Hooker. Grazer stated that I wanted to introduce a visual and sonic world that is a contained entity of the 70s, and Scott felt it was vital to have the brand of music that was Harlem at the time. Denzel Washington pressed Grazer into inviting rapper Jay-Z to write the film's score, but the producer just didn't think there'd be enough for Jay-Z to do given the intentions to do a soundtrack filled with 1970s music. The film's trailer had already used Jay-Z's Heart of the City, Ain't No Love, and the rapper was invited to an advanced screening. The film had a profound resonance on the musician, who decided to create a concept album, also entitled American Gangster. The rapper recorded tracks that were prompted by specific scenes in the film. It was speculated that the album's release in conjunction with the film would attract a young audience and help Universal Pictures generate profits to recover from the film's troubled development history. According to Jay-Z, it was like I was watching the film, and putting it on pause, and giving a backstory to the story. It immediately clicked with me. Like Scarface or any one of those films, you take the good out of it, and you can see it as an inspiring film. American Gangster premiered in Harlem at the Apollo Theater on October 20, 2007. Over 2 weeks before the release of American Gangster, a screener for the film leaked online. The film debuted in the United States and Canada on November 2, 2007, in 3,054 theaters. American Gangster was released in DVD and HD DVD format on February 19, 2008. The home release included an unrated extended version of the film, featuring 18 additional minutes and an alternative ending. The film topped both the DVD sales charts with 4 million units during its first week in stores, more than 3 times as many copies as second-place Michael Clayton, and the rental charts. American Gangster ended up as the 14th best-selling DVD of 2008. It also topped the high-definition charts despite being released in the same week. Toshiba announced it would discontinue the HD DVD format. On October 14, the film saw its release on Blu-ray. In its opening weekend in the United States and Canada, it grossed an estimated $43.6 million, averaging $14,264 per theater, placing the film first in the weekend box office. It marked the biggest opening weekend out of any film in both Washington and Crowe's careers. In its second week, grosses declined by 44.8% to $24 million, being beaten out by B-Movie. In contrast, by its third week, screenings for American Gangster increased to 3,110 theaters as the film surpassed the $100 million mark. American Gangster finished its box office run in North America with $130,164,645. The film experienced similar success overseas. American Gangster was released in the United Kingdom on November 16, and became the highest-grossing film of the week, garnering £2.6 million, $5.3 million, in the box office. It repeated the feat in its second week, grossing an estimated £1.82 million, $3.7 million, at the box office and beating out Beowulf 2 consecutive times. The weekend of November 16-18 saw American Gangster take $14.7 million from 14 territories internationally. At the same time, American Gangster expanded in the European market. It received $2.8 million from 366 theaters in Germany and $3.6 million from 366 screens in France during its opening weekend. Releases followed in Norway and Sweden the succeeding week, where it earned $392,608 and $465,238 from 37 and 59 theaters, respectively. The film was released in the United Arab Emirates during the film's sixth week and grossed a modest $281,922 at the box office during its first week in the Emirate. Similarly, it earned $6.9 million in international markets during its sixth week, adding the total at the time to $40.9 million. By January 25, 2008, American Gangster opened in 37 markets, bringing international grosses to $93 million. In February, screenings for the film debuted in Mexico with a modest $820,482 opening weekend, and Japan, where it opened at the box office with $2.3 million, landing in second place. American Gangster grossed over $266.5 million worldwide at the box office, with international grosses making up 51%, $136.3 million. It ranked as the 19th highest-grossing film of 2007 both domestically and worldwide. Review aggregate Rotten Tomatoes reports that 81% of critics have given the film a positive review based on 218 reviews, with a rating average of 7.00/10, with the consensus being, American Gangster is a gritty and entertaining throwback to classic gangster films, with its lead performers firing on all cylinders. 50 on Metacritic, which assigns a weighted mean score out of 100 to reviews from film critics. The film has a score of 76 based on 38 reviews. 51 audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B+ on an A and to F scale. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times gave the film a perfect 4-star rating and opined, "This is an engrossing story, told smoothly and well." Ebert also praised Crowe's performance, saying that his contribution to the storytelling was enormous. Paul Burns of the Sydney Morning Herald felt that American Gangster was one of the most intelligent gangster films in years and expressed that the film offers the spectacle of grand themes and two bigger-than-life characters played by two of the best actors in cinema. Concluding his review, Burns gave the film 4 out of 4 stars. IGN's Jim Stacks Vejvodar rated the film 4 out of 5 stars, praising the acting particularly of the two protagonists, both dynamic presences on screen, with neither actor outweighing the other's importance to the story, and declaring that despite being preceded by other gangster stories such as Scarface and The Sopranos, American Gangster managed to justify its existence with emphasis on the human and class elements of the story. Manala Dargis of the New York Times strongly commended the film, opining that greatness hovers just outside American Gangster. She continued, "It's a seductive package, crammed with all the on-screen and off-screen talent that big studio money can buy, and filled with old soul and remixed funk that evoke the city back in the day, when heroin turned poor streets white and sometimes red." These sentiments were echoed by Sukhdef Sandhu of The Telegraph, who asserted that the storyline was amazing. In comparison, some reviewers were more critical of American Gangster. Jonathan Crocker of Time Out London was polarized with the film, criticizing its aesthetics. In his review, he wrote, "Scott's meticulous aesthetics can't touch the urban texture and deep focus of The French Connection, The Godfather, Serpico, and Prince of the City, all looming heavily in intertextual nods." In contrast, Crocker praised Washington's acting, writing, "He's immense, centering every scene with tractor beam charisma, that dangerous, easy charm hovering between a luxury smile or blazing violence." In conclusion, Crocker gave the film 3 out of 5 stars. Similarly, Owen Gleiberman of Entertainment Weekly gave the film a C grade, expressing that American Gangster is never dull, but it could have used more good old-fashioned melodramatic intrigue. Gleiberman found Washington's performance to have a ghastly ingenuity. Empire's Ian Freer rated the film 3 stars out of 5. He stated that it was undeniably enjoyable and praised the cast, but also noted that he felt that very little in the movie feels fresh, retreading scenes, riffs and imagery from the whole history of crime flicks, and that the film did not explore enough of Lucas' story and Scott's visual imagination. Slant magazine journalist Nick Shager harshly criticized the film, giving the film a 1 out of 4 stars rating. Shager remarked that the film was dumb as a rock, and that it was far too convinced of its import to be any fun. Giving American Gangster a 2 out of 5 stars, Peter Bradshaw of The Guardian was disappointed with Washington's acting, asserting, "He doesn't seem to relax and enjoy himself in the role, or even inhabit it very satisfyingly." He resumed, "He never has the menace of his dirty cop in Training Day, and we don't see anything like the transformation from street hustler to leader in Malcolm X. That shoulder-shimmying swagger is rarely seen, and the brand classic robes of American Gangster sit on him heavily." Lucas admitted to several news outlets that only a small portion of the film was true, and that much of it was fabricated for dramatic effect. In addition, Richie Roberts criticized the film for portraying him in a custody battle while in real life he never had a child. Roberts criticized the portrayal of Lucas, describing it as almost noble. Sterling Johnson Jr., a federal judge who served as a special narcotics prosecutor for the United States District Court for the Eastern District of New York and assisted the arrest and trial of Lucas, described the film as 1% reality and 99% Hollywood. In addition, Johnson described the real-life Lucas as illiterate, vicious, violent, and everything Denzel Washington was not. Former DEA agents. Jack Toll, Gregory Korniloff, and Luis Diaz filed a lawsuit against Universal saying that the events in the film were fictionalized and that the film defamed them and hundreds of other agents. The lawsuit was eventually dismissed by U.S. District Judge Colleen McMahon. While McMahon noted that the intertitle that appears at the end of the film, stating that Lucas' collaboration led to the arrest of many corrupt DEA agents, was wholly inaccurate, in that Lucas' cooperation did not lead to the convictions, and opined that it would behoove a major corporation like Universal, which is owned by a major news organization, NBC, not to put inaccurate statements at the end of popular films. She stated that the film failed to meet legal standards of defamation because it failed to show a single person who is identifiable as a DEA agent. Many of Lucas' other claims, as presented in the film, have also been called into question, such as being the right-hand man of Bumpy Johnson, rising above the power of the Mafia and Nicky Barnes, and that he was the mastermind behind the Golden Triangle heroin connection of the 1970s. Ron Shepasuk, a biographer of Frank Lucas, deemed the story a myth. Associated Press entertainment writer Frank Coyle noted that this mess happened partly because journalists have been relying on secondary sources removed from the actual events. American Gangster earned various awards and nominations, in categories ranging from recognition of the film itself to the performances of Ruby Dee and Denzel Washington. Prior to the film's release, it was observed as a candidate for the Academy Awards based on its style and the performances of its actors, including the possibility of an Academy Award for Best Director for Ridley Scott. Before getting into the details of what my thoughts on this film are, I would like to pass on a little technique I have for watching films with runtimes hovering around the 3-hour range. Before I start, I already plan on watching it in roughly 3 sessions to break it up. I have learned that this will eliminate the possibility of missing out on a great film due to thinking I do not have the time to see it. With that in mind, before going in, I hit the play button and told myself that if the storyline captured me, then how long I watched would depend on that. American Gangster turned out to be a compelling single-sitting watch as I took in the life of Frank Lucas through the cinematic eye of talented director Ridley Scott. Denzel Washington was excellent in the lead and his delivery was perfect, almost too much, as the film seemed to portray him as a good guy, despite the horrible actions he was committing. Some of this could be accounted to Washington's unmistakable charm, and the rest of why his character was conveyed as a hero was because this was how his community viewed him. At least this is what I took from the view the story took on. The 3-hour length was excessive, but to the filmmaker's credit, other than some useless development of Russell Crowe's character, the bulk of the script was used to capture the life of Frank Lucas from the rise of his empire to the inevitable crumbling of it with a detailed eye. The rest of the cast surrounding Washington was also top tier, which made for a collection of great side characters and strong performances all around. There was not much of this film that did not feel and look realistic to the true events, and the era they happened in. Crowe and Washington, although with little screen time together, do deliver some fun chemistry in their interactions. The business model of Lucas heading to Southeast Asia to get his supply to cut out the middleman was genius and something that could have only been accomplished during the time of the war, and as the film progressed I was waiting for how the script would approach what Lucas would do once the soldiers were discharged and returned home. To my enjoyment, the third act did a great job of closing out the several-year-long run Lucas had, the both good and bad impact he had on people's lives as well as his family surrounding him, and how easily one mistake could cause everything to fall apart. The strength in this film's script was the captivating writing that was detailed enough to make you feel like you were truly getting to know who Lucas was. One of the faults of this film to me was that despite the great performance from Crowe, a lesser headlining star could have easily filled the role, which could have kept the theme from focusing off of main plot. To explain, Crowe is a big name, and with his presence in the movie there comes a certain allotment of screen time he must get. Most of which was spent over explaining the fact he was basically a bad father and a womanizer. This could have easily been conveyed in only a scene or two and through some dialogue rather than too much time being spent on a useless subplot between he and his wife played by Carla Gugino. Their scenes were not bad and both provided the film with strong performances, but in the end their subplot was useless to the closing of the story and just sucked up time. Regardless, American Gangster is still a captivating tale of a clever man who was opportunistic and determined, something that was perfectly conveyed through Denzel Washington. The detail in the film was spot on and the soundtrack was also a great addition to help capture the time period. American Gangster is one of the better crime sagas out there. The scope of the storyline is ambitious, but so was the character the film is based on, and the time spent watching this one will be long, but worth it to see the great performances of a very large cast of skilled actors and actresses that pull you into the era and the empire of Frank Lucas. There are too many movies being filmed in New York. Every single movie seems like it's a postcard to go to NYC. Don't get me wrong, New York is a beautiful place that looks like the movie Blade Runner, but what happened to the old New York? The real New York filled with all of the filth that made the city dangerous. The ugly, decrepit, not safe to walk around past dusk New York. American Gangster captures that side of New York. That's the sexy New York I'm talking about. Harlem during the Vietnam War years. When I'm talking about American Gangster, I'm talking about the newest movie with Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe, not the new music album by Jay-Z. Whereas there have been too many to count movies about the Italian and Russian mob, there have been hardly any movies about the African American mob. Denzel takes us through the life of the notorious living legend Frank Lucas, the New York drug lord. He shows us how he bribed the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War to smuggle heroin in all of the deceased soldiers' coffins. He lets us see how he made a lucrative business while turning Harlem in the 1970s into a hellhole filled with overdosed moms and their crying children in every high-rise project. He shows us how Lucas wanted his entire life to look like it was scripted. He maintains a perfect facade as living the black Norman Rockwell dream, wearing the best clothes, flashing the perfect smile, eating at the good old corner diner, marrying the trophy wife, and always having the photogenic Thanksgiving dinner. Denzel is not the villain he played in Training Day. He was the devil in Training Day, corrupting an innocent soul to do his bidding. In American Gangster, even though he plays the villain, he acts like Black Jesus in a bespoke suit. At times throughout the movie, you're not even rooting for the protagonist. The good guy in Gangster is a womanizer. He's too honest for his own good. He's a workaholic and doesn't care about his wife, his child, or preserving his friendships and family. He's not rich and nobody knows who he is. He's from Jersey. Every cop in New York looks down on a cop from Jersey. Usually the good guys in movies are the most boring character in the film, but Russell Crowe, who plays the detective Richie Roberts, who brings Frank Lucas to justice, is one of the most layered, conflicted, and complicated movie heroes to date. All he wants to do is find and capture Frank Lucas, even if it means being hated by his own police department, his own partner, the police in New York, and his entire circle of trust. Crowe ranks right up there with Eastwood, Pacino, De Niro, and Tommy Lee Jones. It's hard to choose who to root for or who does the better acting job. Russell Crowe shined in The Dud Virtuosity, the last movie he co-starred in with Washington, and he shines in Gangster 2. Ridley Scott films this New York movie with as much tender love and care as would Spike Lee or Martin Scorsese. He trusts his starring alpha males and his hip-hop ensemble cast to bring the rise and fall of Frank Lucas to life. American Gangster brings back the raw cop and mob period piece thrill ride. My parents had the opportunity to see movies like The French Connection, Sir Pico, and The Godfather in theaters. I'm very proud to say that I've had the chance to see American Gangster on the silver screen. There's something intriguing even just within the concept of casting Russell Crowe and Denzel Washington in Ridley Scott's latest film, the crime drama American Gangster. There's Denzel. In Hollywood and beyond, he's recognized as the universal good guy whose class and dignity is constantly on display. However, in American Gangster, he portrays Frank Lucas, an NYC drug kingpin in the Vietnam-era 1970s whose moral sensibilities were mostly wrapped around a cold-blooded sense of business ethics and an unquenchable thirst for the power that success brings. Then, there's Russell. In Hollywood and beyond, he's recognized as a feisty, volatile, and yet immensely talented actor who's had more than one well-publicized scrape with the law even after becoming a family man. Here, however, Crowe is Richie, an honest cop who finds $1 million and actually turns it in. Richie exudes business ethics of a different, yet equally dominant kind. Ridley Scott, at first thought an odd choice to direct such a film, manages to blend these two stories together into an intriguing dual storyline courtesy of screenwriter Steve Zaillian, Schindler's List and Gangs of New York. While American Gangster doesn't quite unfold as the masterpiece it so wants to be, Scott has fashioned a compelling and stylish crime drama that rests almost squarely upon the shoulders of its more than capable stars. Denzel Washington, whose last turn as a bad garnered him an Oscar for Training Day, gives a more refined performance here as Lucas. Lucas turns the drug industry into a family business, employing all of his brothers and mentoring them with the knowledge that the strongest man in the room is the quietest. Lucas is aware that the flashier he is, the more likely he is to be discovered and, in fact, it is sole indiscretion of this principle that leads to his identity being uncovered. Lucas may be quiet, but his actions speak louder than words. Lucas is a killer with a propensity for particularly dramatic killings, and he takes a personal trip to Thailand to score cheaper heroin and cut out the middleman. Lucas, practically alone, invades New York City with a cheaper yet more lethal heroin that sells for less and leaves corpses in its wake. Lucas, in other words, is a badass drug dealer with a businessman's IQ. While Washington is a study in refined intensity as Lucas, it has been well publicized that Lucas, in real life, was more boastful of his killings and, despite his quiet nature, quite a bit more aggressive than is brought to life on screen. Yet, much of this disparity seems more a product of Zaillian's script than Washington's performance, and it remains utterly astounding how much Washington can simmer without ever saying a word. On a side note, this critic's ongoing Denzel point watch noticed that in this film Denzel, once again, utilizes his famous finger-pointing gesture that has become a trademark of his performances. While Crowe's Richie feels like less of a stretch, nonetheless it is a respectable performance by Crowe and a nice balance to that of Washington. Richie is your stereotypical good guy cop with an ex-wife, Carla Gugino, a kid, and a streak of honesty that has made him subject to ridicule even by his professional peers. He, like Frank, wants a better life and studies law at night. With the exception of one scene, Washington and Crowe are not seen together until the film's climactic moments. Yet, largely due to the extensive character development of both men, it all seems to make their inevitable meeting that much more palpable. Each lead's performance is supported nicely by the players in the world around them. As Frank's siblings, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Common, Albert Jones, Warner Miller and J. Kyle Manze all shine, while T.I. and Malcolm Goodwin offer strong performances as his cousins who join the fold. As his mother, whom he moves into a southern mansion, Ruby Dee offers insights into the complex man that Frank has become. Richie, on the other hand, seems mostly surrounded by doubters and naysayers. Not just his wife, but debt. Trupo, Josh Brolin, a corrupt cop who takes as much joy in humiliating Richie as he does screwing with the bad guy. While American Gangster runs 157 minutes, its compelling characters, washed-out cinematography and solid pacing seldom leave a slow spot, and, even at over 2.5 hours, American Gangster leaves you wanting more time with these men as their lives unfold. American Gangster is a modestly flawed yet consistently entertaining crime drama featuring strong performances by Washington and Crowe, excellent cinematography from Harris Savates, and a complimentary soundtrack that bridges scenes nicely. While American Gangster is unlikely to garner much in the way of Oscar attention, the winning combination of Russell Crowe, Denzel Washington, and Ridley Scott makes American Gangster a film to watch. I think it is a safe statement to say that most people, like myself, appreciate a movie that depicts a person or persons rising to the top of the food chain by perseverance, hard work, and some smarts, even if their profession is less than honorable. Ridley Scott, best known for Black Hawk Down and Gladiator, seems to agree with my assumption because he's back behind the director's chair telling the real-life tale of a two-bit hustler turned drug kingpin in American Gangster. The story is about the life of Frank Lucas, Denzel Washington, a street-savvy guy who rose to power in the heroin trade in New York City during the late 60s and early 70s, and Richie Roberts, Russell Crowe, an incorruptible police officer trying to stop him. Similar stories have been told before. Scarface and Serpico come to mind, but American Gangster takes a stab at combining both plots while delving deeper into the characters and the personal implications of their choices. To start, both characters sacrifice their families for personal gain. For Frank Lucas, his desire to live the life of a prominent white man, he's black by the way, supersedes everything. He taints his honest, hard-working Southern family by recruiting them into his criminal organization. He enlists the help of his cousin Nate, Roger Guinevere Smith, in Vietnam to coordinate the shipment of pure heroin into the States, and his four brothers to become the key distributors in the tri-state area. For Richie Roberts, he's left his wife and son on the back burner while he feverishly tries to keep drugs off of the streets, root out corruption on the police force, and study for his bar exam. Both of them think they are acting for the greater good even though they are destroying all that keeps them honest and grounded. And while American Gangster doesn't reinvent the genre, watching these two central figures try and stay afloat amongst all the flotsam and jetsam was worth the cost of admission. Denzel Washington, who is probably one of the best actors alive today, is exceptional as Frank Lucas. It was bewildering to watch him switch between brutal gangster and family man on a moment's notice. And it's all done with the same mannerisms you and I would have while talking to a friend on the phone about a trivial occurrence: calm, collected, and cool. For him there is no difference between setting a man on fire and shooting him in cold blood or taking his mother to church every Sunday. Russell Crowe isn't a slouch by any means either. His depiction of a man caught between a rock and a hard place was equally effective. It's hard to fathom that 75% of the police force was corrupt in those days, and that being honest meant you're a target by your peers as well as the criminals. It was painful to watch him try to hold on to his friends and family even though he knew in his heart he couldn't keep them. I should also mention that the set and art departments for this movie put on a great production. Capturing the look and feel of an early 1970s New York City can't be an easy task, but these guys and gals made it look very realistic. I especially liked the little VW assigned to Crowe. There are some great supporting characters throughout too. Josh Brolin as the corrupt detective Trupo, Armand Asante as the unhappy mobster Dominic Catano, and Cuba Gooding Jr. as fellow street hustler Nicky Barnes all add some compelling moments to the mixture and should be applauded for their work, especially Cuba since he's done some horrible work recently. The lone drawback to American Gangster is it is damn near 3 hours long, as are most of Ridley's better movies. There are plenty of scenes that should have been left on the cutting room floor. It's the classic case of not knowing what was or wasn't needed to make the film work. The incident with Richie and his partner Javier, John Ortiz, didn't need so much airtime. Neither did all the courtroom drama or family dinners and parties. The scaling back or elimination of these scenes would have allowed for more emphasis on what I thought was a rather weak ending. I felt the finale was anticlimactic. It almost seemed like the writer, Steven Zaillian, suddenly realized he needed a way to end the film, so he just patched something on. That notwithstanding, American Gangster is a well-told drama. Even though it does lose focus now and again, it never loses sight of the prize. And although I doubt it will happen, it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility that both Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe are nominated for their roles by the Academy. 6 years ago, I saw a movie that managed to more than spark my interest. I am talking about the 2007 drama directed by Ridley Scott called American Gangster. The movie, which starred Oscar winners Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe, told the story about drug lord Frank Lucas and the New Jersey cop who brought him down, Richie Roberts. Set between 1968 and 1976, American Gangster began with the death of Harlem mobster and Lucas' own boss, Ellsworth "Bumpy" Johnson. Following Johnson's death, Lucas found himself embroiled in a rivalry for control of Harlem. Realizing that he lacked the cash to assume control, he began a scheme that cut out middlemen in the drug trade and buying heroin directly from his source in Southeast Asia. He also organized the smuggling of heroin from Vietnam to the U.S. by using the coffins of dead American servicemen, cadaver connection. The story also focused upon the man who had eventually captured Lucas, namely a New Jersey cop for Essex County named Richie Roberts. Roberts turned out to be a rare case amongst the law enforcers in the tri-state area, namely an honest cop. When he and his partner, Javier Rivera, stumbled across a cache of untraceable drug money, Roberts had insisted that it be reported. This one act not only drove his fellow cops, apparently honest cops were not trusted, to ostracize both Roberts and Rivera, and drove the latter to overdose on drugs that happened to be part of Lucas' new product called Blue Angel. The movie not only focused upon Lucas and Roberts' professional lives, which would eventually lead to the former's arrest in 1975, it also focused on their private lives. Whereas drug lord Lucas is a loyal family man and faithful husband, honest cop Roberts turned out to be a notorious philanderer who had allowed an old friend and local mobster to be his son's godfather. Director Ridley Scott did a superb job of steering the audience into the world of the drug trade, East Coast organized crime and law enforcement from the late 1960s to the mid-1970s. With Steve Zaillian's script, he also managed to give the audience a clear view of capitalism and its corrupting influence on mobsters, the police, and local neighborhoods. This was especially conveyed in 2 scenes. One featured a conversation between Lucas and competitor Nicky Barnes, Cuba Gooding Jr. in a cameo role. The former gave the latter a lesson on brand names and other forms of capitalism. It seemed that Barnes had been selling his product using Lucas' brand name of Blue Angel. Believe or not, drug dealers apparently did stamp brand names on their products. Why not? Alcohol and tobacco companies do. The other featured a segment on how corrupt cops like NYPD Detective Trupo, Josh Brolin, extort both money and drugs and cut into the mob's profits by selling the latter on the street. Also, Scott and Zaillian gave the audience a look at the devastating impact that street drugs had on society, including soldiers in Vietnam, local citizens of Harlem, and cops like Roberts' partner, Rivera. Scott managed to recreate this setting without allowing the movie's setting to slide into a cliché. I got so caught up in the movie that by the time it ended, 2 hours and 40 minutes had passed without me realizing it. In 1995, both Washington and Crowe did a movie together, a science fiction thriller called Virtuosity. Needless to say that by the time the movie's first half hour had ended, I realized it was a stinker. And yes, it did deservedly bomb at the box office. Fortunately for Scott, he was lucky to work with the two dynamic actors' second collaboration. And both Washington and Crowe were lucky to see co-star in a movie that turned out to be 20 times better than Virtuosity. Washington effortlessly recreated both the charm and the menace of the drug lord. And Crowe infused his usual intensity into the solidly honest Roberts. American Gangster was also blessed by a solid cast led by the likes of Cuba Gooding Jr. as the very splashy drug kingpin Nicky Barnes, the intense John Ortiz as Roberts' drug-addicted partner, Javier Rivera, Ruby Dee as the staunchly emotional Mama Lucas, and Josh Brolin in his deliciously corrupt portrayal of NYPD Detective Trupo. I was very disappointed when American Gangster failed to receive numerous Academy Award nominations during the 2007 to 2008 Movie Award seasons. In fact, it only earned two, a Best Supporting Actress nomination for Ruby Dee and a Best Art Direction nomination for Arthur Max and Beth A. Rubino. And nothing else. Like I said, I felt very disappointed. If you have not seen American Gangster yet, I recommend that you do so. After all, it is now available on DVD. Lucas, Denzel Washington, is the new crime lord in town and begins directly importing heroin from Vietnam via the use of U.S. planes. He becomes the most powerful man in Harlem, going higher than the Italians and everyone. Roberts is one of the last honest cops in town. He even turns in $1 million that he found in the back of a car. His honesty lands him the job as part of a special investigation unit to bust the big drug lords of New York. He is able to find a group of cops who are honest and work with him. The story begins to intertwine as Roberts begins to discover that Lucas is the one that he needs to bust, and as Lucas fights to keep his head afloat in the changing of times. Washington and Crowe are great in this movie. They never seem to fail in difficult roles, and they bring this movie together. This movie's cast has lots of big names and lots of speaking roles. It is well casted, I believe, though, and no character really seems to fail. The storyline is amazing considering it is based on a true story, and the ending, which I did not want to ruin, leaves you very satisfied with what goes on. Right off the bat, I'm finding it difficult in this series to review movies that are good, but I don't have a personal story attached to them. Bad films can always be critiqued and either torn apart or have an attempt made to fix the issues. Mediocre films can be analyzed for what didn't come together. But a good film doesn't have a whole lot you can say about it that's interesting. I bought American Gangster because I heard it was a good crime film, and I enjoy crime films. I watched it and thought it was a good crime film. It's got a great plot, great actors turning in great performances on a great script with a great director. What more can I say? Crime movies that focus in any part on the criminal side of things have a problem they need to overcome. How to take a lifestyle that carries an inherent cool factor, with lots of money and material goods and a rebellious, dangerous element baked in, and not have it come across as being a good thing. TV Tropes labels this as "do not do this cool thing," where movies, in trying to show the downsides of the criminal life, accidentally end up portraying it as far better than the side of law and order. American Gangster walks this fine line and does it well. Frank Lucas has a pretty darn good life for most of the movie. He rises to power on the back of hard work and integrity. He has plenty of nice things to his name. He has a family that loves him. When played in contrast to Detective Richie Roberts, it's clear who the winner here is. Roberts has no friends because of his straight-laced nature. He's in a fierce custody battle and divorce. He's not nearly as well off. Even at the end of the movie, when Frank has lost everything, he still manages to come across as the cool, suave man vs. Roberts' continued downbeat existence. But there are a few scenes that I think highlight the difference between the two far better than most mob movies manage. The biggest one is the Thanksgiving scene, in which we see Lucas sitting down to a lovely dinner with his family in their mansion, Roberts eating alone in his dingy apartment, and dozens of heroin users out on the streets using Frank Lucas product. What the movie does well is in not trying to glamorize the actual drug trade and its effects, and in making sure that we are well aware that Frank Lucas, no matter how cool and polite he may seem, is directly responsible for these drugs being on the street. He's there when people use, he's there when the drug is readied for distribution, he's there when the money is brought in. No matter how cool and nice his lifestyle may appear, we are never ever allowed to forget that it is all built on a drug empire that causes constant harm and misery to a city full of people. It's also not afraid to shy away from the harsher side to all of these things. Roberts might be a good character, but he is by no means heroic or pure or even nice. In fact, he's kind of a self-righteous douche, more than happy to take part in immoral actions just as long as he never breaks the law in his eyes. I could spend another 1,000 words getting into why the law is not necessarily morality and vice versa, but it's enough to say that just because Roberts is very definitely against the illicit drug trade, which is an upstanding act, does not make him a good guy. American Gangster cuts to the heart of everything that a good gangster flick should be, and for that I think it's well deserving of far more praise and attention than it received at its release. The moral complexity of its joint protagonists never impeaches onto the far more clearly defined moral certainty of its overall message, that heroin on the streets is a bad thing that caused ruin to entire communities in the 70s and 80s. It navigates the tricky waters of gangster lifestyle without ever succumbing to the temptation to make out that such a lifestyle is any more or any less glamorous than it is. And it isn't afraid to really assess the sort of person it would take to be such a stickler to the letter and spirit of the law above all else. Definitely one to watch for any fan of the genre. Here's a startlingly original true-life story told in an oddly unoriginal way. And that attempt at instant classic status in the title doesn't quite convince. It's got no more dark grandeur than American Idol. The film is about the 1970s Harlem drug lord Frank Lucas and Richie Roberts, the straight-arrow cop who took him down. Lucas's career is heavily pregnant with one irresistible metaphor. He claimed to have directly imported high-grade heroin into the United States from the Far East during the Vietnam War, hiding the drugs in the flag-bedecked coffins of fallen American troops, containers that, naturally, no one dared touch. Criminals tend also to be liars, of course, and it is possible that this particular juicy detail may be exaggerated or just invented, but director Ridley Scott has taken the inner-city urban myth at face value in this muscular period drama starring Denzel Washington as New York's Emperor of Smack, and Russell Crowe as the rumpled officer coming after him. Wide collars and center partings are much in evidence. President Nixon is always making jowly appearances on TV sets, and Steve Zalian's script has Roberts, while giving chase to a cash-laden car, shouting to his own driver, "Follow the money," in sly tribute to the Watergate catchphrase. There's so much sweaty, pugnacious masculinity in the air, the testosterone is condensing and running down the windows in rivulets. Scott has shuffled the classic scenes and tropes of the gangster movie and dealt them like a deck of playing cards. There's a big face-off between old-school bad guy and old-school good guy in the manner of Michael Mann. There are nightclub scenes and epiphanic glimpses of beautiful women, blasts of pop music, and plenty of nostalgic voice-over montage, explaining how the wise guys scams worked, in the manner of Scorsese. And, further back than that, there are church-going gangsters presiding over pious family events, intercut with horrible shootings in the style of Coppola. There is even a bit of lachrymose brass on the soundtrack, which somehow makes you think of oranges rolling all over the sidewalk. It's not cliched exactly, it's just very, very familiar. And the one part that might make it unique, make it fascinating, the Vietnamese connection, and military personnel arranging to stuff drugs into GIs' coffins, all this is hardly touched on at all. The film stays very much on the familiar mean streets of New York City. When Washington's frowning mobster makes his one visit to Thailand, meeting with the local grower, he concludes his business with his characteristic grin, "My man," but adds that he doesn't want to drag his ass out there ever again. Clearly, Ridley Scott feels much the same way. Villain and cop are both outsiders. As a black man, Lucas is the underdog, massively patronized and then hated by the white mafia he outflanks. Roberts is Jewish, an identity signaled by just 2 touches, a star of David Neckshane glimpsed while he rose with his estranged wife near the start, and a white bigot calling him a kike near the end. Whatever their actual reputation for anti-Semitism, the Harlem African Americans voice no such slurs on Roberts' religion in this film, preserving the important solidarity between the 2 men. It's not just a question of 2 alpha males grudgingly respecting each other. Roberts wants to arrest Lucas so that he can expose the massive network of corrupt police officers who leech on Lucas's drug money. That may well have been precisely his motive in real life. Here it makes for a questionable moral equivalence between these 2 charismatic street warriors. The real villains are obviously supposed to be the hapless Italian Americans and one straightforwardly horrible bent copper, played by Josh Brolin. What is disappointing is Washington himself. He doesn't seem to relax and enjoy himself in the role, or even inhabit it very satisfyingly. He never has the menace of his dirty cop in Training Day, and we don't see anything like the transformation from street hustler to leader in Malcolm X. That shoulder-shimmying swagger is rarely seen, and the brand classic robes of American Gangster sit on him heavily. He looks as though he is trying to be that most un-American of things, royalty. Crowe, by contrast, is looser, paunchier, feistier, his suits are cheaper, fit less well, and he doesn't give a damn. There is one very good moment. Cautious Lucas can hardly contain his rage at the flashy, attention-grabbing clothes being worn by his excitable younger brother Huey, Chiwetel Ejiofor. He tells him they scream "Arrest me." But then, in a moment of weakness, he agrees to wear a showy chinchilla fur coat and matching hat to an alley fight, an outfit picked out for him by his wife, and which is so colorful you might assume it's for her, not him. Against his better judgment, he wears it, and catastrophically attracts the attention of cops both clean and dirty. It is the beginning of the end, and, furious at himself, Lucas throws the staggeringly expensive garment into the fire. But the event never packs the punch that it should have done. Just occasionally, with a kind of guilty start, Scott shows the victims of drugs, poor black people living in squalor. But proposing the gangster as a scary but somehow thrillingly real American design classic is uneasy, and uninspired. American Gangster is very well constructed. Very sturdy. It's strange to talk about a movie like it's a skyscraper, but these are the adjectives that come immediately to mind. American Gangster is that rare sort of movie that inspires lofty expectations, based upon the casting and the trailers, and also directly meets those expectations. I'm not certain of the film's legacy, but I am fairly confident in recommending it to damn near anyone who is allowed into, or compelled to see, an R-rated film. You've seen the trailers, right? This film is tracking very well, so I'm guessing you did. Let's not kid each other. Okay, Denzel Washington plays real-life gangster Frank Lucas back in the 70s. Though he's originally from North Carolina, Lucas has moved to Harlem and apprenticed under a notorious crime boss. Lucas himself gets a crack at the lucrative drug trade near the start of the film, and we're off. Russell Crowe plays Detective Richie Roberts, a New York detective tasked with bringing the drug trafficking and police corruption problem to heel. Crowe vs. Denzel for all the marbles under Ridley Scott's directorial eye. Hard to fail with that setup, right? I'll offer my only criticism of the film right off the bat. Frank Lucas is the hero of the story. Though the film tried to show consequences, tries to achieve some level of balance, I think it's impossible. Denzel is just too damn likable and you root for him. It's impossible not to. I'm a big fan of anti-hero stories, so I don't have a problem with what's an effective method based only upon it working. No, my problem is that this is based on a true story with real-life implications. How many people died using Frank Lucas drugs or by his hand? So when I find myself admiring the man, a little alarm bell starts going off. It's a slight one, and the movie is still extremely well made and enjoyable, but I think this factor will keep the movie out of the realm of great in terms of historical value. The Departed isn't near as good a film as this, but as it's not based on a single character, it somehow seems cleaner upon reflection. Moving on, the film is strong throughout, again with the sturdy. The story is built in a way where you never know exactly what's coming next, and you never know who you should be worried about. Crowe is a dedicated public servant, but he's also kind of a bastard too. For instance, he's a bad father and the film doesn't hide it. Denzel is a drug dealer with enemies all over the place, so you naturally worry for him as well. I'd also be remiss if I didn't point out Josh Brolin's solid work here as a sleazy cop. Between this and his effort in No Country for Old Men, I'd say Mr. Brolin is gearing up for a few years' worth of good script offers. This is a film worth seeing, if only because it's rare that a script and a concept come together in such a taut, exciting, and interesting way. Perhaps the very point of this film was that Lucas was likable even as a terrible person who did awful things. Perhaps Scott and company are satisfied knowing they told the truest story possible, regardless of the morality of the equation. For my part, I'll take a film that makes me think any day of the week, and Gangster does that and more. It's a cool feeling film from men who are experts at making cool films. It doesn't have plot holes and it doesn't have downtime. It's only got an expertly crafted story and a nice soundtrack. If you're a fan of movies, this is for you. If you're a fan of acting, this is for you. If you've read this far, then this is for you. We can talk about the rest of the issues later, but check out the movie first. It'll work better that way. Frank Lucas likes to think of himself as just a plain old businessman and entrepreneur filling a free market niche. He buys his product direct, cuts out the middleman and passes the savings on to his customers. His product is twice as good at half the price. Frank doesn't use the stuff himself, of course. For him, it's just a conduit to an outsized American dream, one that allows him to buy a house for his mother, take care of his family and get great seats at championship boxing matches. More than anything, though, Frank craves respect, just as much as his customers crave the blue magic he sells. And in 1970s New York, there's little to stop a motivated hustler like Frank from making a buck. The police don't want to put guys like him away, they just want part of the cut. Right? The exception is Richie Roberts, a flawed cop with an honest streak. He's been tapped to head a New Jersey vice squad to crack down on the region's biggest drug dealers. At first, he figures he'll have to tackle the mafia to do it. But then Richie sees Frank stride into Madison Square Garden for a premier boxing event with a chinchilla coat and ringside tickets better than the city's known Italian crime lords. It looks like New York's found a new dawn. Richie's a bit messed up, but when it comes to doing his job, the cop's a straight arrow. When he and his partner find $1 million in dirty money stashed in the back of a car, they could easily pocket it. His partner argues that, if they don't take it, they'll become pariahs among their cash-scheming colleagues. But Richie is, in his police work, incorruptible. When his partner asks him to lie on a police report to save his skin, Richie refuses. When a mobster offers him a bribe to lay off Frank, Richie walks away. When a rival dirty cop tells him that they need to help keep Frank in business to keep the graft flowing, Richie informs him that the police he works with do things a little differently. During a messy custody hearing, though, Richie's ex-wife tells him that his vaunted honesty is really nothing more than an excuse for him to be dishonest about everything else. The words hit home, and Ritchie's actions reflect an integrity that's used by the filmmakers to contrast the self-deception Frank engages in. What matters in business is honesty, integrity, hard work, loyalty, and never forgetting where you came from, Frank tells his brothers. And he's convinced his brand stands for something, getting mad at other drug dealers when they dilute his product and pass it off as his. But despite the fact that he loves his mother and does nice things for her, including taking her to church, this is a guy who kills people and sells drugs, not toasters, whether or not he's willing to admit it to himself. Frank is a churchgoer, and his marriage takes place in the church. He says a prayer during Thanksgiving dinner, asking God to feed our souls with heavenly grace. As we hear Frank pray, the scene shifts to horrific images of drug addicts shooting up, shivering, even overdosing. Frank is arrested outside the church as the congregation inside sings Amazing Grace. And we see the rest of the Lucas clan getting busted and handcuffed during the same tune. It is, perhaps, a bit of foreshadowing, since because of a plea bargain, Frank ends up partnering with Ritchie to rid the police of corruption. Once their task is completed, Ritchie asks Frank whether he wants something to drink to celebrate. "You got any holy water?" Frank asks. Nude and nearly nude women populate Frank's drug factory, where pure heroin is packaged for the street. They're naked, Frank explains, so they don't steal any of the product. They slowly dance and writhe as they work, and audiences see everything in several scenes. 3 naked women give a man a rubdown. Women in skimpy clothing, presumably prostitutes, appear frequently, sometimes loitering on street corners or apartment buildings, sometimes dancing in Bangkok bars. One of Frank's party guests is shown squeezing the breast of another guest. Ritchie is a womanizer. He's shown having sex with his lawyer, her uncovered legs wrapped around his waist as they noisily pant and bounce around his kitchen. He also shares a passionate kiss with a stewardess. Some of his Vice Squad workers are shown in a nightclub, one gyrating passionately between 2 rotund female dancers, another dancing suggestively with a blonde woman. Frank deals death just as freely as he deals drugs. American Gangster opens with him participating in a man's torture and death. The victim, whose shirt is bloody, is doused with gasoline and set on fire before Frank shoots him several times. The gangster's just getting warmed up. In flashback mode, we see Frank shoot a guy in the head while the man's sitting on a bed, his blood spattering against a window. Frank walks out of a breakfast meeting to shoot a rival point blank in the forehead, and we see the corpse lying in a pool of blood, the bullet wound clearly visible. Frank's non-lethal attacks are, oddly, even more painful to watch. When one of his cousins shoots a party guest in the leg, we see the shot fired and blood fly. Frank punches the cousin and then repeatedly slams his head with a piano lid. In another scene, he bashes his brother's head repeatedly into a car window, shattering the latter and rendering the former unconscious. As for the cops, when dirty ones raid Frank's house, Frank's wife gets slapped across the face and a guard dog takes a bullet. One fight includes biting and door smashing. One police officer commits suicide by shooting himself in the head, blood spatters. Another bloody body is seen lying dead on a floor. Thugs pound someone with a pool cue and push someone else down a flight of stairs. Unnamed assailants try to kill Frank's wife, peppering their car with bullets. And all of this is just a prelude to Ritchie's raid on Frank's drug factory, where bullets blacken the field of vision and blood collects on the ground. No fewer than 125 F words. The S word clocks in between 20 and 30. God's name is misused, most often paired with DN, more than a half dozen times. Offensive racial epithets are hurled, as are vulgar names for sexual body parts. Just because a movie is about a drug dealer doesn't mean it always shows people using the merchandise. But that's not how American Gangster plays it. Here we see a lot of folks sticking needles sometimes broken into various parts of their bodies. They shake and sweat, shown to be nearly animals, prey to their own seemingly uncontrollable cravings. A few die of overdose. 1. A young mother lies lifeless on a bed as her child cries beside her. Some peripheral characters are shown snorting cocaine. 2. Frank gets angry with one of his cousins for always being coked up. While Frank is never shown indulging, others use it openly around him, even at his parties. It should go without saying, then, that we also see characters drink and smoke with abandon. Frank often smokes a cigar. Richie downs whiskey, etc. Richie was apparently an inattentive husband and is now an inattentive father. Aspects of his character, it's suggested, that led to his divorce. Richie and his partner break into a suspect's car without a warrant. It was apparently on its way, but that's a minor infraction compared to what seems like an entire department of crooked cops who view the job as an opportunity to get rich, not do good. American Gangster is based on the real life of Frank Lucas, who spent 15 years behind bars. But Denzel Washington's Frank seems to be a far cry from the real deal. On screen, Frank is erudite, mannered, and reasonably reserved. Real-life Lucas claims, in a 2005 New York Magazine story, that he never went to school even for a day and owned 100 garage, custom-made suits. Forget the principles Frank spews in the film. Lucas says he was in it for the money. Indeed. During a family get-together in the film, Frank sits down with a young cousin of his, a natural athlete with a 95-mile-an-hour fastball, and asks him why he didn't attend a tryout with the New York Yankees that he set up for him. The cousin tells him that he doesn't want to be a ball player anymore. And that's just the problem inherent with films like American Gangster. Frank, played with a ferocious dignity that could only be delivered by Washington, is a character folks want to be like. He's rebel cool, and the hero worship began even before the film was released, on his upcoming album called Surprise. American Gangster, rapper Jay-Z stresses the similarities between himself and Frank. His song No Hook reportedly contains the line, "Please don't compare me to other rappers / compare me to trappers / I'm more Frank Lucas than Ludacris. Such is life. If being bad wasn't appealing, nobody would be." American Gangster tries to remind us that Frank is spreading a huge evil. Its depictions of heroin users are tragic. What it ends up doing, though, is allowing evil to seduce through this character. The A-list pedigree that surrounds the big, brawny, macho piece of entertainment, American Gangster, is a formidable group. Directed by Ridley Scott, produced by Brian Grazer, written by Steven Zaillian, and starring powerhouse actors Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe, it would have been a shocking surprise if the film had turned out to be anything less than a spectacular entertainment. Upon first viewing, I felt it was one of the best movies of its year, and after numerous repeat viewings over the years, I've really come to love it. Everything from the top-notch production values, the larger-than-life story, the salty dialogue, and the sly, cool aesthetic of Scott and master cinematographer Harris Savates, Zodiac, The Game, Birth, Elephant, all combine for a thrilling true crime saga that never sags once during its close to 3-hour run time. Denzel Washington, in one of his best performances, is Frank Lucas, a smart and classy businessman whose business, it turns out, is heroin. Lots of it. Lucas, who for years was a driver and protege to Harlem's original gangster number 1, Bumpy Johnson, a sneering Clarence Williams III, takes over the drug trade in New York City after Johnson drops dead from a heart attack. However, Lucas has bigger plans than Johnson could have ever imagined. After recruiting what seems to be almost all of his extended family from North Carolina, mother, brothers, cousins, etc., and relocating them to Harlem and surrounding areas, Lucas, in an effort to avoid using a middleman in his drug operation, used a family connection stretching to the jungles of Vietnam, and traveled to the heart of darkness himself, striking a deal with a heroin manufacturer to bring the drug from the jungles of Southeast Asia to the streets of New York. The potency of this heroin was twice as strong, and with the absence of the middleman, half the cost. This bold maneuvering is made possible by crooked military personnel, who shipped the drugs back to the States in a variety of methods, most notoriously, in the coffins of dead American soldiers. It's too wild to be true, but it is. Running on a parallel track to Lucas's story is the account of honest cop Richie Roberts, smoothly underplayed by bulldog performer Russell Crowe, in another excellent piece of manly acting. Roberts is the classic case of great cop but bad husband/father. Going through a messy divorce and child custody hearings with his ex-wife, Carla Gugino, super sexy as always, Roberts is as much of a screw-up at home as he is a great, truthful cop, one working in an otherwise almost totally corrupt police force. The fact that he doesn't keep $1 million in unmarked drug money that he finds in a dealer's car, something he easily could have done without ever getting caught, instead opting to turn it in as police evidence, is enough to mark him as suspect by his fellow police officers, which doesn't help him as he moves into the tricky waters of New York City's drug scene. Roberts catches wind of the new drug trade in the city, and takes it on obsessively. Battling a seriously crooked fellow officer named Trupo, played with menacing glee by Josh Brolin, Roberts is almost a one-man task force. Not only is he battling the drug dealers, he has to watch his back for deceitful detectives who'd rather take bribes than make arrests. The brilliance of Zalian's screenplay is the way that the personal and professional lives of Lucas and Roberts mirror each other, while also being total opposites. Lucas is a family man, the kind of guy who takes his mother to church on Sunday and eats breakfast with all of his brothers. But he's also the kind of guy who'll shoot a rival dealer in the head in broad daylight. He's even not afraid to threaten his brothers and cousins to make a point. Roberts, on the other hand, is a terrible dad and husband, but he operates incredibly as a cop and he loves his job. He even makes time to study for and then take the bar exam. I was reminded of Michael Mann's masterwork Heat with the back and forth of these characters. Similar to Robert De Niro and Al Pacino's characters, Washington and Crowe are basically the same people, separated by opposite sides of the law, but brought together by a common goal: what they know best. American Gangster, working almost as two movies in one, allows its two stars to meet, only at the end, also similar to Heat, in a terrific sequence where the two men have an intelligent conversation, rather than a bloody smackdown. Zalian, no stranger to expensive, populist fare, he's written Hannibal, Clear and Present Danger, and Mission Impossible amongst others, is also a master wordsman and social commentary purveyor. Other credits include A Civil Action, Schindler's List, and Gangs of New York, and the balance that he brings to both stories in American Gangster is nothing short of amazing. Cohesive and engrossing, the story's narrative moves at a clip, due also in part to Pietro Scaglia's dynamic film editing, introducing the audience to a bevy of colorful characters and various locations, jungles, city streets, drug houses, in a coherent, unhurried fashion that still carries pep and verve. Scott directs with energy and 70s flavor, but never becomes show-offy or garish. Less overtly stylish than his work in stuff like Gladiator, Black Hawk Down, and Hannibal, Scott gives American Gangster a shadowy, smoky, rich look. The immaculate production design by frequent collaborator Arthur Max is a major help as well. Taking cues from such crime films as Brian De Palma's Scarface and The Untouchables, Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas, and Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather, Scott takes this familiar genre and spices it up in new ways, never forgetting about the fascinating procedural at the heart of the story. This is confident, gripping direction of an ambitious script which never loses sight of its tight focus, even when its grander worldview is so vividly displayed. That's the genius of Scott as a director. As always, Scott infuses the film with enough vibrant period detail for 2 movies, but never allows his obsession with realistic surroundings to interfere with the intimate moments of his layered plot. He also stages a bravura drug raid/shootout that is the very definition of awesome. Bloody but never gory and gritty at all times, it's a stunning piece of action directing that ranks up there with the best of these types of set pieces. This is the kind of big-ticket entertainment that only a craftsman of Scott's stature could create. Remember how oh my god cool it was to hear, all those years back, that Michael Mann, with his movie Heat, was gonna get Al Pacino and Robert De Niro together on screen for the first time? And then they were hardly together at all except for that one scene, but it turned out to be okay because that one scene was incredible. American Gangster is like that, except it's got the combustible combination of Russell Crowe and Denzel Washington on screen together for the first time. Even if they were actually on screen together for the first time that same year as Heat 1995 in the bit of sci-fi nonsense virtuosity. Because no one talks about that movie, and no one would even have remembered it if I hadn't brought it up in the first place. So forget I even mentioned it. So, Ridley Scott's American Gangster brings together Crowe and Washington, both of whom stalk the screen, as they always do, as if the movies were invented for them, and how freaking explosive can it be to smash these guys into each other. Except they don't get the opportunity to face off on screen until more than 2 hours into the film's 2-hour and 40-minute runtime, and that's fine. Because their concurrent stories run parallel and keep you in a state of constant suspense and dread, you forget that the necessities of plot and the conventions of Hollywood narrative require that their 2 stories eventually collide in Scott's masterful back and forth, which is riveting enough to, ironically, make the crash seem inevitable in a way that is not demanded by cliché but is a function of a certain sort of fated irony. Irony is all over this movie in the most confounding, and, ironically, the most satisfying way, a way that makes you want to shake your head at the paradox of it while also acknowledging its truth. American Gangster is one of those films that, the more you think about it, the more you feel like you're falling down Alice's rabbit hole into a world where the rules work but they piss you off because it seems like, if the world were good and decent, they wouldn't. The world is not good and decent, perhaps might go the theme of gangster, but sometimes people are, and sometimes only accidentally. Crows, 3:10 to Yuma, Cinderella Man, Richie Roberts is a New Jersey cop, a rough-edged working-class guy who's trying to better himself by studying law at night school. His colleagues already think he's better than he needs to be, he's scorned as a Boy Scout for actually following the laws he's meant to be upholding. But he's also a cocky bastard who hangs out with a childhood friend who's now a mafioso, and he's kinda mean to his ex-wife and kinda ignores his kid. And when he stumbles onto Frank Lucas's criminal endeavors, he latches onto the case like a bulldog and won't let go until he brings Lucas down. Washington's déjà vu, Inside Man, Frank Lucas was a driver and general dog's body to the Godfather of Harlem, until the Godfather died and Frank, looking to better himself, took over the operation. He comes up with a scheme for racketing up his drug business by eliminating the middleman and importing heroin himself directly from Thai suppliers. His business and marketing acumen is astonishing, and before long he's selling junk twice as good as anything else on the street at half the price. It's the American dream of entrepreneurship, of making customers happy, really happy, in this case while raking in the dough. It's win-win. Frank is utterly ruthless and won't hesitate to put a bullet in the brain of anyone who steps on his toes, but he believes himself a gentleman, and he is, in his own perverse way. He's even good to his mother. This is all based on a true story that went down in the early 1970s. Frank and Richie are real, the now elderly Lucas actually worked as a consultant on the film, but the ring of truth comes not from its factualness but from Stevens' Aliens, The Interpreter, Gangs of New York, brilliant script, which highlights in what wickedly different directions such qualities as persistence and a dedication to hard work can take people, and from Scott's Kingdom of Heaven, Gladiator, production, which is committed to authenticity. Scott shot in real, unfakeable New York City and Thai locations, no Toronto or Hawaii stand-ins here, and Zalian, along with Crowe and Washington, created in the cinematic Richie and Frank, two fascinatingly contradictory and complicated men. You can't entirely hate Frank, for all his terribleness, and you can't entirely like Richie, for all his virtues. And you can't forget them. Ridley Scott's American Gangster is a good movie. Scott manages to pull off the not inconsiderable feat of making 157 minutes move so well that the film feels shorter than any number of movies running 30 minutes less. The story is interesting and entertaining. Stars Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe are on their game. As an entertaining yarn of the true story variety about an honest cop who is possibly too honest up against a drug-dealing criminal mastermind, it's hard to fault. As one of the great movies of the year, well, let's put it this way, I went into the movie with 16 candidates for my 10 best list at the end of the year, and I came out of the movie with that number unchanged. Perhaps it's simply a case of not having the proper reverence for the modern gangster picture, but in this instance, I think it's something inherently lacking in American Gangster that keeps me from admiring it as much as those behind the film would like me to. To begin with, while both Washington as Frank Lucas and Crowe as Richie Roberts are up to their respective tasks, it's worth asking how taxing those tasks really are. Is either actor called on to do anything very remarkable? Not really. They give good accountings of themselves, but they've both done better, more challenging work. Crowe is unlikely to outdo his performance in 3:10 to Yuma anytime soon. Moreover, no one else in the film is handed anything better. The wonderful Chiwetel Ejiofor is largely wasted in the role of Huey Lucas, Frank's brother and second-in-command. Josh Brolin as the spectacularly corrupt Detective Trudeau is just that, spectacularly and obviously corrupt. His role is nothing more than entertaining villainy of the mustache-stroking variety, though in the case of the soup strainer festooning Brolin's upper lip, it'd be more like petting a medium-sized kitten. Ruby Dee as the matriarch of the Lucas clan manages to convey a sense of savvy dignity, something entirely attributable to the actress and not the script, which plants her squarely in the mold of loving gangster moms established by Beryl Mercer in William Wellman's The Public Enemy back in 1931. The leading ladies Lee-Marie Nadal as Lucas' wife and Carla Gugino as Robert's ex-wife fare less well. Nadal is simply called upon to be attractive and loyal, while Gugino is saddled with one of those stock policeman's neglected wife roles. It's this kind of essential thinness of characterization that keeps American Gangster from being quite the great American epic Ridley Scott and company seem to think it is. That Scott has shot the whole thing in a kind of low-light, drab gray color scheme is, I guess, meant to make it all feel more serious than it is. For me, at least, it only resulted in wishing that someone would buy Scott some lights. With these things working against it, it's little short of amazing that American Gangster is as effective as entertainment as it is. That, I think, can be laid squarely at the enjoyable gimmick of its structure. Here we have two of the most highly regarded actors of our time starring as adversaries in an epic tale of the rise of a drug dealer and the cop who brought him, and 3/4 of the police department, down, and the two don't have a single scene together until the film's last 20 minutes. What's remarkable is that it not only works, it works in the film's favor, keeping the expectation of their inevitable meeting going for the bulk of the film. Yes, some of the intercutting between Lucas' conspicuous consumption and Robert's Spartan existence gets a little heavy-handed, but the structural concept is close to brilliant and the smoothness of its execution closer still. At no time is the story out of balance. The shifts between the two are so impeccably timed that the stories seem to flow in an impossibly seamless manner. When the two adversaries finally do meet, it proves to be worth the wait just to see Washington and Crowe play off each other in a series of splendidly intelligent scenes. It's great stuff, almost great enough when combined with the structure to raise the film to the level to which it aspires, but really it's no more than a conjuring trick. It's a neat one, but a conjuring trick all the same. Rated R for violence, pervasive drug content and language, nudity, and sexuality. Adult audiences will be enthralled by the drama, not least because it is based on the true story of Harlem drug lord Frank Lucas in the 1970s and his eventual arrest by dogged cop Richie Roberts. Blessed by the rich detail and spot-on casting for which Scott is famous, the film is destined to be a big hit at the box office in North America but also in international territories where the star names and perennial fascination with New York City crime stories will bring in the crowds. Awards play is also possible for the film, which is one of the few large-scale major Hollywood productions. The film boasts 130 speaking parts, on offer this season. Rather like Scott's Gladiator and Scorsese's The Departed last year, its sheer entertainment value and the top-level craft on show might steer Academy voters to favor it. The performances, particularly another powerful turn by Washington, are also noteworthy. There are echoes here of Michael Mann's Heat, 995, which also told parallel stories of criminal and cop on his trail, although this story is true and all the more colorful for being so. The film begins with the death of popular Harlem crime boss Bumpy Johnson of a heart attack in 1968. His trusty driver and Lieutenant Frank Lucas, Washington, takes over his turf and, faced with competition from other thugs who step into the breach, comes up with a brilliant idea to seize power. He flies to Bangkok where his cousin is stationed during the Vietnam War and the two of them establish their own source of pure heroin in Southeast Asia. The drugs are transported to the US in US military planes and distributed around Harlem at a cost-effective price in packets marked Blue Magic. Enter Richie Roberts, Crowe, a New Jersey cop unpopular for his rigidly honest ways in a police force rife with corruption. When his partner dies of a drug overdose and nobody else will work with him, Roberts is assigned to assemble his own team and focus on the exploding drug problems in the city. Frank's import business takes off and he assumes power in Harlem as Blue Magic sweeps through the streets. He buys a mansion for his North Carolina-based mother, Dee, and brings his brothers, led by his brother Huey played by Ejiofor, to Manhattan to run the business with him. His mantra is discretion at all costs, unlike other flashy gangsters on the street like Nicky Barnes, Gooding. He meets a beautiful former beauty queen from Puerto Rico called Eva, Nadal, and the two marry. He goes to church every Sunday. In all but profession, he is an upstanding citizen. Roberts on the other hand is a mess. His marriage, to Gugino, is falling apart and she is moving to Vegas with their son. He sleeps around, and lives and breathes his job. Just as he is reaching a dead end in search for the mysterious supplier of Blue Magic, Lucas inadvertently shows himself up at the Muhammad Ali/Joe Frazier boxing match of 1971. Roberts starts to look into Lucas and begins to suspect that he has found the kingpin. Things come to a head when the Vietnam War ceasefire is called in 1974 and Lucas's guaranteed supply is threatened. He does one more run to Thailand, this time smuggling the drugs back in the coffins of Army veterans killed in action. Roberts infiltrates the Lucas inner circle and gets the information about when, where, and how the shipment will arrive in the US. But he still cannot pin the crimes on Lucas until he has located the center where Lucas' team chops and bags the goods. Washington is restrained and self-possessed as Lucas, only occasionally fueled by murderous rage and, since he's never a drug user, never resorting to Tony Montana-style histrionics. Crowe is the perfect foil for the other half of the film, scrappy and damaged, but with the same determination of his unknown nemesis Lucas. Their meeting at the end of the film is predictably satisfying, especially since Roberts persuades Lucas to identify a plethora of corrupt cops. 75% of the force working in narcotics at the time were indicted as a result. The story, as superbly scripted by Steve Zaillian, is rife with predictably murky morals, especially since the police force of the time is so immoral. If Lucas comes across as super cool and sometimes heroic, that is because many of the cops here, personified by Josh Brolin as corrupt Detective Trupo, were on the take or violently racist. Much of the pleasure of the film comes from Scott's brisk and businesslike pacing and seemingly effortless confidence with his camera, which makes the 158-minute running time fly by, and within that fast-paced drama there are a multitude of tasty supporting parts: Ruby Dee as Frank's apparently naive mother, Idris Elba running the team of naked girls who chop and bag the dope, montages and set pieces. American Gangster may not possess the mythology of The Godfather or the technical audacity of Goodfellas, but it has substance aplenty, a sense of humor and the power to entertain, which mark it out as one of the year's most rewarding pictures. American Gangster is based on the true story of Frank Lucas, an African-American drug kingpin that rose to power in the New York metropolitan area during the Vietnam War. Lucas is played by Denzel Washington in the uncharacteristic role of bad guy, but much like similar mafia characters from other films, with a counterbalanced code of ethics when it comes to family. The film was directed by Ridley Scott and also stars Russell Crowe as Richie Roberts, the almost only honest cop who has been tasked with putting a dent in the drug trade in the area. The film opens in 1968, with Lucas as the driver for the former area drug lord Bumpy Johnson for many years, who also served as a mentor to Lucas. Of course, by driver I also mean bodyguard and enforcer, as demonstrated by a rather gruesome opening scene that shows us just what sort of thing Lucas is capable of. Johnson dies very early on and is demonstrated to have that peculiar ethical split that compartmentalizes his criminal activities from the rest of his life. Despite the fact that he ruins lives by supplying heroin to the population, he laments the arrival of supermarkets and discount electronics stores due to the loss of customer service, and at Thanksgiving he passes out turkeys to the poor. Probably in the same neighborhoods housing some of the drug addicts he is supplying. When Bumpy dies, amazingly, of natural causes, a power vacuum is left among the gangsters, and folks who do not have any of his sense of fairness, I use the term very loosely, are trying to insert themselves as the new big man. Lucas doesn't like what he sees and decides to step up and take over the organization. He moves in quickly and with brutal efficiency and quickly establishes himself as the new boss. His problem is that he's competing with the well-established mafia for drug traffic, making it difficult to really break out to the next level of monetary and positional power. He comes up with a plan that will catapult him far beyond the Italians' power and money by going directly to the source of the drug in Asia, getting it direct from the manufacturer, and shipping it to the US on military transports from Vietnam by bribing people along the chain of command. Soon he's selling heroin that is twice as potent and costs half as much as what's currently available on the street, and within a very short time he becomes insanely wealthy and powerful. He brings his extended family up from down south to help him expand his network and the reach of his distribution. The other side of the story involves Richie Roberts, Crowe, the honest cop who has police work in his blood, to the detriment of everything including his family. He and his partner stumble across $1 million in unmarked bills, and despite his partner's strong insistence that they just keep the money, he decides to turn it in. American Gangster is based on the true story of Frank Lucas, an African-American drug kingpin that rose to power in the New York metropolitan area during the Vietnam War. Lucas is played by Denzel Washington in the uncharacteristic role of bad guy, but much like similar mafia characters from other films, with a counterbalanced code of ethics when it comes to family. The film was directed by Ridley Scott and also stars Russell Crowe as Richie Roberts, the almost only honest cop who has been tasked with putting a dent in the drug trade in the area. The film opens in 1968, with Lucas as the driver for the former area drug lord Bumpy Johnson for many years, who also served as a mentor to Lucas. Of course, by driver I also mean bodyguard and enforcer, as demonstrated by a rather gruesome opening scene that shows us just what sort of thing Lucas is capable of. Johnson dies very early on and is demonstrated to have that peculiar ethical split that compartmentalizes his criminal activities from the rest of his life. Despite the fact that he ruins lives by supplying heroin to the population, he laments the arrival of supermarkets and discount electronics stores due to the loss of customer service, and at Thanksgiving he passes out turkeys to the poor. Probably in the same neighborhoods housing some of the drug addicts he is supplying. When Bumpy dies, amazingly, of natural causes, a power vacuum is left among the gangsters, and folks who do not have any of his sense of fairness, I use the term very loosely, are trying to insert themselves as the new big man. Lucas doesn't like what he sees and decides to step up and take over the organization. He moves in quickly and with brutal efficiency and quickly establishes himself as the new boss. His problem is that he's competing with the well-established mafia for drug traffic, making it difficult to really break out to the next level of monetary and positional power. He comes up with a plan that will catapult him far beyond the Italians' power and money by going directly to the source of the drug in Asia, getting it direct from the manufacturer, and shipping it to the US on military transports from Vietnam by bribing people along the chain of command. Soon he's selling heroin that is twice as potent and costs half as much as what's currently available on the street, and within a very short time he becomes insanely wealthy and powerful. He brings his extended family up from down south to help him expand his network and the reach of his distribution. The other side of the story involves Richie Roberts, Crowe, the honest cop who has police work in his blood, to the detriment of everything including his family. He and his partner stumble across $1 million in unmarked bills, and despite his partner's strong insistence that they just keep the money, he decides to turn it in. As it turns out, the reason his partner did not want to turn in the money was not just greed. The police force at the time was so incredibly corrupt, that having it known that they actually turned in this quantity of money marked them as untrustworthy and made them pariahs. Eventually Richie's honesty leads to him being selected to head up a task force to attack the drug problem in NYC. He handpicks a few select cops that are as honest as he is, and he has run-ins with some seriously corrupt higher-level officers along the way. Ridley Scott does a great job of sucking you into the late 1960s/early 1970s and really captures the culture of the time and of the Lucas family. In order to try to give us a complete picture, I did find the film meandering a little bit as well as a bit longer than I would have liked. Those are only minor nits, however. American Gangster is a compelling and fascinating look at Lucas' rise to power, punctuated by amazing performances by both Russell Crowe and Denzel Washington. While Crowe was excellent, losing himself in yet another role, Denzel was mesmerizing despite the fact that he played essentially the same person he does in many films, except with a darker twist. The man is just plain intense and wonderful to watch on screen. If you've been craving a serious drama and don't mind some pretty intense violence, which fits completely within the context of the film, I highly recommend you check out American Gangster. I didn't have the highest expectations for American Gangster. Ridley Scott may have directed some of the best movies ever made, but aside from his beloved throwback epics, of which Gladiator, Black Hawk Down, and Kingdom of Heaven are the good ones, he doesn't have much of a signature style, and accordingly many of his lesser films aren't as immediately associated with him. And liked by critics though American Gangster was, advertising and discussion at the time gave the impression that it was little more than a common mafia film but with black people instead of Italians. After watching the film, I realized that in itself is notable, but it goes way deeper. Despite American Gangster sounding like a generic movie title, it could not be more apt, as the film unfolds into a fascinating examination of race and capitalism as they play into the American dream, one that seems even more relevant today than it did in 2007, and it's all a true story. In 1968, Bumpy Johnson, Clarence Williams III, is the Italian mafia's point man in Harlem. When he dies of a heart attack, he leaves a small fortune to his driver and apprentice Frank Lucas, Denzel Washington. Despite Lucas' humble origins, he witnesses the decline of black businesses as corporate chains take over, and comes up with an inspired idea. In the apex of the Vietnam War, he can use his military connections to import heroin directly from Southeast Asia, selling a superior product with lower overhead costs. This quickly brings Lucas a level of wealth on par with a CEO, and he eagerly plays the part of a legitimate businessman, hobnobbing with the rich and famous along with his former beauty queen wife, Limari Nadal, but never showboating. His success from Blue Magic, his purer, cheaper brand of heroin, causes him to run afoul of the old Cosa Nostra, as well as New York's narcotics cops, almost all of whom are on the take and in the business themselves, led by Detective Nick Trupo, played by Josh Brolin. One police officer who defiantly isn't is Detective Richie Roberts, Russell Crowe. Practically forced out of the narcotics beat due to his unwillingness to partake, Roberts is snatched up to become a key player in President Nixon's newly declared war on drugs. He and his team gradually realize that Lucas is somehow involved in the trade, but only Roberts himself is willing to believe that Lucas is at the top. Unlike many other classic gangsters, Lucas prides himself on looking legit. He renounces the crass behavior of his rivals. He buys an old mansion imported from Europe brick by brick. He chides his reckless brother Huey, Chiwetel Ejiofor, for his garish style, though it's sometimes hard to distinguish in a 1970s setting. When he confronts rival Nicky Barnes, Cuba Gooding, Jr., over Barnes' use of the name Blue Magic, he doesn't talk about threats of violence, but of trademark infringement. He deals with government bureaucracy as well, he just does it outside the law. And, above all, he uses his newfound largesse to benefit his family and community. Although the film doesn't hesitate to show the devastating effects of his business, and although film has long drawn parallels between organized crime and the American dream, Lucas' seductive charm is not without its merit, though it helps that he's played by Denzel Washington, of course. And when Roberts suggests that the war on drugs isn't really meant to stop drug use, it being too profitable to both the criminal enterprises and the criminal justice system, it's not just a sigh of exasperation, it's an object lesson in the benefits of free trade. American Gangster never claims to be about race, but it necessarily is. As a black man making it on his own and paying it back to Harlem, a race man, Lucas arouses the fury of the Italians and the narcotics cops who serve them, but they can barely do more than stand idly by while he steamrolls them with his superior intellect and leadership. But while Lucas continually faces prejudice, he also uses it to his advantage, as the authorities, in their refusal to believe that a black man could be a kingpin, constantly overlook him. Before I go any further, I want to talk about American Jews, my own people and the subjects of many gangster movies past and present. Hard as it may be to believe, there was a time just over a century ago when most Americans were white English-speaking Protestants, whose culture at the time was so pervasive that large companies, publishers for example, could and would refuse to engage in perfectly legal and ethical business practices purely on the grounds of cultural taboo and/or prejudice and still thrive. Then Jewish immigrants like Alfred Knopf and Simon & Schuster came around, had no problem importing Kafka and Dostoevsky and publishing authors like Hemingway who said dirty words, and put all the WASPs out of business. By the same token, Lucas makes it in America through methods that the criminal establishment overlook, but which are not morally worse. Is it any surprise then that the only cop who believes in Frank Lucas' empire is Richie Roberts, a Jew? If that sounds kinda dry and academic, I don't mean it to be. American Gangster starts patiently, but evolves into an unlikely thrill ride that continues to top itself in its monumental audacity, not through high-octane action or gore, but in how far the story ends up going, climaxing in a mesmerizing and long-awaited face-to-face between Lucas and Roberts. I don't want to spoil it, just watch this movie. Shot in standard 16:9 ratio, American Gangster may not technically fit the bill for a Ridley Scott epic, but it sure as hell feels like one. Going into a film with fairly high expectations is never a good thing, but from all the raves, and public love alike, I couldn't go into with anything less than the utmost hope that it would be a crime film reminiscent of the French Connection. Anyways, here's my review. Ridley Scott, one of the best inconsistent directors of all time, brings us his latest film in American Gangster. Though most of his films have been dramatic or war-oriented, he has done a crime flick here and there, none of them have been about gangsters. Well, his first shot at a gangster flick is a success. Though it could have been touched up, his direction is great nonetheless. His take on the screenplay was very good, making it predominantly suspenseful, rather than a gritty bang-bang get the bad guy and go type film, which in my eyes would have been a disappointment. As I said, his direction could have been better, mainly because I was hoping for a Frank Lucas film, as in a film devoted to the man who was Frank Lucas, and not a film that spends about a third of its time showing corrupt cops, and their lives. In my opinion, the film would have benefited immensely with a less cliched outlook on crime. The screenplay was adapted from an article in New York Magazine by veteran Steven Zaillian. As I said about Scott, this man has written crime films before, but never a gangster one. He did a great job giving the audience a feel for both the man and the monster Roberts and Lucas, but not so much Lucas. Throughout the whole film, I felt as if Lucas was more two-dimensional than Roberts, a supposed secondary character. There was unnecessary information about Roberts, but not enough information about Lucas, though Lucas dominated the film. It just felt a bit out of place. Besides this flaw, the dialogue was sharp, but slightly cliched, mainly due in part by so many gangster films having the same feel. Again, as I previously mentioned, the film would have really benefited with more of an expose on Lucas. But for what it was pretty damn good. The acting of this predominantly two-man show was including, but not limited to just that. First off, this man was hidden talent that was unearthed last year, mainly due to his exposure in such films as Children of Men and his Golden Globe performance in Kinky Boots. I am talking of course about Chiwetel Ejiofor, who in this film plays Frank Lucas' cousin Huey Lucas. I was very disappointed with the amount of screen time Ejiofor got, because he is such a talent, it hurts to see him be wasted so. His performance was about 15 minutes long, I'd say. Though he was limited to 10% of the film's running, he was still very good, like usual. Every scene he had with Washington was great, because their chemistry was so realistic. Almost all of his dialogue had meaning, and every line of it that he spoke was wonderful. Another great performance to add to his 2007 resume. This film also sports another great, underrated, but not for long actor in Josh Brolin. This year alone he's had 4 of the most acclaimed films, and he's been either the leading actor, or had a major supporting role in 3 of them. In this film, he plays Detective Trupo, a crooked cop, who is relentless in his job, and is always out for number 1, himself. Every so often you'll find a film character that is one of the most despicable and the most rage-filling that you'll see. I believe this character is in the running for this year's. Though there are a lot of antagonists in film, a lot of them played very averagely, Brolin gives the audience a realistic depiction of a bad cop. It's not common you'll find an actor that can not only recite their lines, but also carry such an attitude that makes you have real emotions over a fictitious persona. If Brolin weren't cast as Trupo, I think the film would have lagged. Along with Casey Affleck in The Assassination, if nominated, Russell Crowe will be said alike, that he belongs in the leading category, and I could not disagree more. He has as much screen time as Denzel, and probably has more dialogue than him to boot. Anyways, onto the performance. Crowe plays Richie Roberts, who seems to be the only good cop in the film. As I previously said, Crowe has more to work with than Denzel, as the film pries into his love life, working life, and his obsession with Lucas. He shows love, hate, disappointment, doubt and obsessiveness as well as any other actor working today. With this, Crowe delivers another excellent performance to add to his already extensive acting resume. Onto the performance all critics have been talking about, Denzel Washington as Frank Lucas, the man who brought the streets back to the street. As far as criminals go, Lucas was by far one of the most interesting ones. A man who said what he meant, and meant what he said. Who was both a lover and a fighter. And a man who was both a criminal, but also honest. If you're hoping for a film that's all about Lucas, you will be distraught. While Washington's performance is the best, it was sadly not as deep as Crowe's character, giving Washington less to work with, and less of an impact to make. Though, as we all know, Washington can turn nothing into something, a very big something at times. This is one of those times. He works with greed, anger, despair, and aggression very well. So well in fact, that I'd call his performance dynamic. Overall, as well-rounded a performance as any actor in this situation could have turned out. This is a fairly technical film, but there wasn't a wide variety of technical aspects to work with. Mark Streitenfeld composed the ever-so-reused Street score. Though it does have an interesting difference or two, its basis is the same old, and brings nothing new to the table. This is really disappointing for me, because his collaboration last year with Ridley Scott for the film A Good Year had one of the most amazing ones of the year/decade. I was just expecting more from him. The film editing is come see. It has its glorious moments, but then there are times where you just wish the scene were shorter, if not just not there at all. The pacing of the film is fine, and for a film that surpasses 2.5 hours, it's great. You're constantly intrigued by the story, and there's enough action to keep you wanting more. The cinematography by the always great Harris Savides was great as always. He sets a really dark tone for the film to work with. His work for this film is all around great. One of the many great scenes he gives us, is the Ali vs. Frazier fight. The atmosphere is fantastic, mainly due in part to the lighting, and the perspective from the camera. Just wonderful stuff. Unfortunately, Savides does not make my top 5 of the year, for the second time this year. 6 years ago, I saw a movie that managed to more than spark my interest. I am talking about the 2007 drama directed by Ridley Scott called American Gangster. The movie, which starred Oscar winners Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe, told the story about drug lord Frank Lucas and the New Jersey cop who brought him down, Richie Roberts. Set between 1968 and 1976, American Gangster began with the death of Harlem mobster and Lucas' own boss, Ellsworth "Bumpy" Johnson. Following Johnson's death, Lucas found himself embroiled in a rivalry for control of Harlem. Realizing that he lacked the cash to assume control, he began a scheme that cut out middlemen in the drug trade and buying heroin directly from his source in Southeast Asia. He also organized the smuggling of heroin from Vietnam to the US by using the coffins of dead American servicemen, cadaver connection. The story also focused upon the man who had eventually captured Lucas, namely a New Jersey cop for Essex County named Richie Roberts. Roberts turned out to be a rare case amongst the law enforcers in the tri-state area, namely an honest cop. When he and his partner, Javier Rivera, stumbled across a cache of untraceable drug money, Roberts had insisted that it be reported. This one act not only drove his fellow cops, apparently honest cops were not trusted, to ostracize both Roberts and Rivera, and drove the latter to overdose on drugs that happened to be part of Lucas' new product called Blue Angel. The movie not only focused upon Lucas and Roberts' professional lives, which would eventually lead to the former's arrest in 1975, it also focused on their private lives. Whereas drug lord Lucas is a loyal family man and faithful husband, honest cop Roberts turned out to be a notorious philanderer who had allowed an old friend and local mobster to be his son's godfather. Director Ridley Scott did a superb job of steering the audience into the world of the drug trade, East Coast organized crime and law enforcement from the late 1960s to the mid-1970s. With Steve Zillion's script, he also managed to give the audience a clear view of capitalism and its corrupting influence on mobsters, the police, and local neighborhoods. This was especially conveyed in two scenes. One featured a conversation between Lucas and competitor Nicky Barnes, Cuba Gooding Jr. in a cameo role. The former gave the latter a lesson on brand names and other forms of capitalism. It seemed that Barnes had been selling his product using Lucas' brand name of Blue Angel. Believe or not, drug dealers apparently did stamp brand names on their products. Why not? Alcohol and tobacco companies do. The other featured a segment on how corrupt cops like NYPD Detective Trupo, Josh Brolin, extort both money and drugs and cut into the mob's profits by selling the latter on the street. Also, Scott and Zillion gave the audience a look at the devastating impact that street drugs had on society, including soldiers in Vietnam, local citizens of Harlem, and cops like Roberts' partner, Rivera. Scott managed to recreate this setting without allowing the movie's setting to slide into a cliché. I got so caught up in the movie that by the time it ended, 2 hours and 40 minutes had passed without me realizing it. In 1995, both Washington and Crowe did a movie together, a science fiction thriller called Virtuosity. Needless to say that by the time the movie's first half hour had ended, I realized it was a stinker. And yes, it did deservedly bomb at the box office. Fortunately for Scott, he was lucky to work with the two dynamic actors' second collaboration. And both Washington and Crowe were lucky to co-star in a movie that turned out to be 20 times better than Virtuosity. Washington effortlessly recreated both the charm and the menace of the drug lord. And Crowe infused his usual intensity into the solidly honest Roberts. American Gangster was also blessed by a solid cast led by the likes of Cuba Gooding Jr. as the very splashy drug kingpin Nicky Barnes, the intense John Ortiz as Roberts' drug-addicted partner, Javier Rivera, Ruby Dee as the staunchly emotional Mama Lucas, and Josh Brolin in his deliciously corrupt portrayal of NYPD Detective Trupo. I was very disappointed when American Gangster failed to receive numerous Academy Award nominations during the 2007 to 2008 movie award seasons. In fact, it only earned a Best Supporting Actress nomination for Ruby Dee and a Best Art Direction nomination for Arthur Max and Beth A. Rubino. And nothing else. Like I said, I felt very disappointed. If you have not seen American Gangster yet, I recommend that you do so. After all, it is now available on DVD. It is the late 1960s and Frank Lucas, Denzel Washington, seems to be living the good life. He is polite and charming, dresses well, lives in a fine apartment in late 1960s New York, has a beautiful Puerto Rican wife, and loves and supports his large extended family. He is also, as described by Detective Richie Roberts, Russell Crowe, the most dangerous man walking the streets of New York City. Frank Lucas is a heroin drug lord. He goes directly to the source of heroin, deep in the jungles of war-torn Vietnam, and smuggles shipload upon shipload of drugs into the United States, sometimes going so far as to hide it in the coffins of young soldiers. His drug empire has grown and stretched out its arms into every part of society, but like every empire throughout history, Lucas' empire must fall, and Detective Roberts is determined to be the man to bring it down. Going into a movie with the word gangster in the title, I hardly expected this to be a peaceful movie, and it isn't, but I didn't find it as blood-drenched as last year's The Departed. The opening scene features a man drenched in oil, lit on fire and then shot. Other scenes have people beaten, shot point blank in the head or from a distance, with brief splatters of blood or people lying in pools of blood. A policeman slaps a woman and later shoots a dog. Obviously, drug use is central to the story, and thus graphic scenes feature the preparation and injection of heroin and the fatal consequences of its abuse. Even more disturbing is the gratuitous nudity and pervasive language. The F word is thrown around more than 100 times, many with mother attached to it, as well as the S word, and various other colorful phrases. God's name is also abused many times. As for the nudity, 2 or 3 scenes take place in clubs with bikini-clad women dancing or serving drinks, and the women who prepare the heroin for selling work fully nude so they can't steal any, resulting in many shots of full frontal nudity. Elsewhere, Roberts and a woman have sex standing up, with graphic noises and movement, but no nudity. Amidst all this violence, profanity, and drugs, it was hard to find anyone honorable. Sure, Lucas is a family man who loves his wife and his mother very much and would protect them from harm at any cost. He is also a hard, bitter man who has no qualms about shooting a man in the head in a public square or bashing a nephew's head against a piano for making a mistake. Frank Lucas is a man who goes to church to sing Amazing Grace with his mother one day and collects thousands of dollars in drug money the next. There is nothing honorable about him. Richie Roberts is a politically uncorrupted man in a corrupt world, where the cops are not above taking bribes from drug runners and where a man is mocked for not taking for himself $1 million found in the back of an abandoned car. He is set on bringing Lucas to justice as much as Lucas is on breaking the law. As a family man, though, he fails. He has affairs with other women and isn't a very good father, and his knows and admits this, but he doesn't try to change. However, in spite of this and his often short temper and foul mouth, he should be noted for his loyalty, courage, and sense of justice. In spite of all this, though, I found the movie to be generally dark and without a sense of hope. A hint of redemption for any of these characters, be they cop or criminal, was simply not present. To be sure, historically and dramatically, this film is very interesting and intense, and exceptionally strong performances from Washington and Crowe will probably garner attention come Oscar night, but all of that is not enough for me to recommend the often violent, frequently profane American Gangster to anyone, except discerning adult audiences. This film, directed by Ridley Scott, screenplay by Steven Zaillian, based on The Return of Superfly, produced by Ridley Scott, starring Denzel Washington, cinematography Harris Savates, edited by Pietro Scalia, music by Mark Streitenfeld, production companies Imagine Entertainment, distributed by Universal Pictures, release dates October 19, 2007, running time 157 minutes. Country United States. Language English. Budget $100 million. Box office $269.8 million.